CatsCast, Episode 18 for September 2023. Match.Cat by Ember Randall. Hello and welcome to CatsCast, your monthly feline fiction podcast. I'm your editor and host, Laura Pearlman. This month, I'm happy to bring you Match.Cat by Ember Randall. This story is a CatsCast original. Our author this week is Ember Randall. Ember is a software engineer who specializes in user-centered design and accessibility. They got into tech to make the world a better place, which is the same reason they write. If their stories or the products they work on make at least one person happy, they count it as a success. In their free time, they enjoy reading, running, hiking, and generally exploring the outdoors, as well as creating new tales via LARPing. Their stories have been published by Cast of Wonders, Zombies Need Brains, and other venues. Find them at www.emberrandall.com. Our narrator this week is Laura Pearlman, who is, well, me. She's had a few short stories published here and there and edits a podcast about cats. She currently has one cat, Sephi, who consistently loses at games of one-card Monty. You can find Laura on Blue Sky as at laurasbadideas.bsky.social. Now just kiss already, and then listen closely because there's something we need to tell you. Match.Cat by Ember Randall, narrated by Laura Pearlman. They say cats have 9 lives, but that's not quite right. 9 is more of an average. In reality, you get as many as death gives you, which means it behooves any sensible cat to suck up while they can. Or at least that's what I told myself as I wound around death's legs, giving them my best, never-been-petted meow. The unmatched quality of their ear scritches had nothing to do with it. A snort echoed above me. You look like one of those spoiled lap cats you're always deriding, you know. I glared up at Alfonsius, Lord Alfonsius Darrowfell of the Silent Wing, to give the owl the full title he often insisted on. Insurance is never wasted. I was on my 7th life, and a cat couldn't be too careful, right? I headbutted Death's leg, and they obligingly reached down to scratch behind my ears. They'd chosen the form of a middle-aged woman today, like they often did to visit my mistress, and their nails were the perfect length to get at an itch I hadn't quite been able to reach. I purred. Melissa, the witch who'd rescued me when I was just a kitten, laughed. Careful, or she might follow you home one of these days. She bustled over to the table, teapot in hand. Oolong? You said you wanted to branch out last time, and I think you might like this blend. Made it myself. Death's cheeks pinked. I'd love to try it. To my disappointment, they stopped petting me in favor of wrapping their hands around the tea mug, breathing in the steam with an appreciative smile. I flopped over onto my back to look up at Alfonsius. Any bets this time? He ruffled his feathers. Have you considered that they may be perfectly happy as friends? You're just saying that because you keep losing. And, ironic though it was, it infuriated me. I'd happily lose our little bets if our people would finally realize what was right in front of their noses. For 2 years now, they'd been dancing around each other, each too shy to ask the other out despite the obvious longing on both sides. I didn't know how they didn't see it. Even if they couldn't smell pheromones, couldn't they tell how perfect they'd be for each other? I squinted up at Melissa, who was beaming as Death complimented her tea blend. If either of them had chosen, they could have heard my conversation with Alfonsius, but they were thoroughly wrapped up in one another. I almost wished one of them would activate a translation spell. Maybe that'd get through their heads when nothing else did. But, alas, they seemed content to gaze into each other's eyes and murmur awkward pleasantries. Alfonsius sighed. I will grant, there may be some measure of attraction. Only some? I twitched my tail. Tell me, what excuse does Death have this time for visiting? Is it as flimsy as the last 10 times? Alfonsius didn't bother to answer. We both knew I was right. Death might visit a neighborhood witch once or twice a year in the course of their duties, but not every week. Yet every week found them knocking on Melissa's door once more, each time with a new and ever more absurd excuse. Last week, they'd found a spirit hamster who needed a home. The week before that, it had been a local politician's death that just so happened to put them in the neighborhood. And if they didn't stop by, Melissa would find equally specious reasons to call on them. They were so clearly infatuated with each other, yet neither of them would make the first move. We have to do something, I decided, rolling back to my feet. Come on, garden time. Complaining under his breath, Alfonsius abandoned the perch Melissa had grown for him last winter and flapped after me out the door. Neither of our people so much as looked up. The garden was the heart of Melissa's power and looked it. Verdant green life bloomed from trellises and planters and sprawling plots of dirt, filling every inch of space with leaves and vines and flowers. Sculpted bushes bursting with red berries bordered a small koi pond, while weeping willows overlooked a bubbling stream. Some of the plots were organized into neat rows with stakes labeling what was found in each section, but most of the plants flourished in a wild, disorganized riot. The summer sun warmed my ink-black fur as I padded over to my favorite spot, a stone alcove next to the koi pond. It was beneath my dignity as a familiar to try to catch any of the fish, of course, but the cool stone contrasted nicely with the hot sun. Alfonsius settled onto a thorny bush beside me, eyeing the koi with some interest. "Don't," I warned. He tipped his head away. "So, what infernal schemes are you planning this time?" "Nothing infernal," I protested. "But we can't just let things carry on like this. Our people need us." "What, then?" I ignored his grouchy tone. "We have to convince one of them to say what they're really feeling. Problem is they're both too scared. Either we have to make it less scary or make it impossible not to speak up." I stared at the circling koi, entranced by their orange shimmer, then shook myself. What if there was a storm, a really big one? Death would have to stay here, and there's only one bed in the cottage. Death doesn't sleep. Fine. I pulled my eyes away from the fish again. What about the big midsummer gala? Everyone's supposed to bring their partners, and Melissa was saying last year that Pretty kept making snide remarks about her being alone. If they pretend to be dating for the gala... It worked in the movies, didn't it? Alfonsius snickered. Where do you get these ideas? My tail twitched irritably. What would you suggest, then? Love potion? First, ew! There's a reason those things are illegal, you know. Second, they're already in love. They just need to admit it. Alfonsius shrugged, unconcerned by possible moral implications. Raptors, I'd found, rarely cared, and honestly, I wouldn't have either if not for Melissa's lectures. Truth potion, maybe? I hesitated. Doesn't force any particular topic. If they stick to their normal small talk, we'll never get anywhere. But the idea had potential. Maybe we need someone else to ask one of them out. Make the other one jealous, then they'll have to speak up. I started assembling a list of options. Wizard Carson was far too introverted, and I didn't think our local phoenix spirit was interested in women. But the stone witch Amaranth with her ever-growing polycule might work. Or we could simply slip them the potion, then ask directly, Alfonsius pointed out, interrupting my nascent plans. I twitched my whiskers at him. Fine, be boring. It wasn't a bad plan, though. We snuck back in through the back door, though, judging by the way the two were talking, they wouldn't have noticed if we'd come in screaming. Still, we stayed quiet as we crept down the stairs to Melissa's cellar workroom, where we were assaulted by a dozen pungent scents of herbs, flowers, and less nameable ingredients. I sniffed, trying not to sneeze. Magic hung heavy in the air, crackling like static electricity along my fur. Melissa's wards hummed a welcome as they parted to let us through. I went straight for the shelves of completed potions, blessing both Melissa's organization and the familiar spells that let me read. She had a whole row of truth potions. They were a common request, and she provided 4 different levels of potency. I selected a moderate one that would compel truth rather than simply light up the drinker when they lied, and nudged it out of its holder. Fun fact: cats, even familiars, lack opposable thumbs. After I tried and failed to grasp it with my teeth without shattering the glass, Alfonsius snorted. "Let me." He hopped down and picked it up in his talons. "Go create a distraction, and I'll pour this into the tea kettle." Licking my shoulder, I gave him a baleful stare for long enough to prove that I didn't take orders from him. Then I bounded out of the room, striking up a piteous cry as soon as I reached the top of the stairs. Melissa whirled to me, nearly knocking over her chair in the process. "Terex? Terex, what's wrong?" Her fingers began to shape a translation spell. I couldn't let that happen, so I leapt for the counter. A bowl of bread dough sat there, proofing, and I not so accidentally stepped in it as I hurtled past. Death lunged for it just as Melissa grabbed for me, and I propelled myself off Death's shoulder to dodge my witch. "Sorry," I yelled, though neither could understand me. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Alfonsius swooping down, vial, corked vial, clutched in his talons. Corks. Shit. Praying the owl was smart enough to deal with it, I dashed from the room like my tail was on fire. Melissa ran after me, calling my name. Death, unfortunately, didn't follow. "Alfonsius, what on earth?" Glass cracked and Death swore. I skidded to a halt on the living room rug and spun to see a guilty-looking owl holding half of a now-empty vial. Purple liquid coated his talons and speckled his feathers. More was splattered on the countertop. I buried my head beneath my paws. So much for subtlety. Melissa scooped me up, clucking. "What game are you two playing? Is that one of my potions?" I widened my eyes at her. Maybe?" She sighed. "How many times do I have to tell you? No playing in my workroom." She ran a hand down my back, and despite myself, I started to purr. "Come on, let's get you both cleaned up." Rather than gesture for a cleaning spell, though, she headed towards the bathroom. I squirmed. "What? No baths? I don't need a bath." "Tough," she informed me cheerfully. "You're getting one." I glared at Alfonsius over her shoulder. Next time, we were trying one of my plans. Unfortunately, that meant I had to come up with one, and that was easier said than done. Amaranth's familiar nixed the idea of her mistress asking Melissa out, and gave me a lecture on jealousy and ethics in the process. Melissa laughed at me when I suggested that she find someone to take to the rapidly approaching midsummer gala. "You and Death could always go together, you know," I murmured, cross-eyed with pleasure as she scratched beneath my chin. She paused. "That'd be weird. We're just friends, and it's Death, you know?" I didn't know, but I didn't like the wistfulness in her voice. She was my witch, and I was supposed to make her happy, but I was failing miserably. I had to come up with something, and soon. When she didn't resume petting me, I slid off her lap and prowled over to the bookcase. Maybe one of the books or movies stacked there would hold some inspiration. It was an eclectic collection, but there were plenty of romances mixed among the cookbooks, grimoires, and histories. I nudged a few out. The main characters had to have ways to get the attention of their love interests, right? But the covers, swooning ladies and shirtless guys, offered few clues, and my paws weren't shaped right to turn pages. I meowed pitifully at Melissa. With a soft chuckle, she crouched beside me. "Is this a hint, Cat?" I hissed, then pawed at one of the DVDs. "Let's watch something fun." Maybe if I could get her in the right mood, she might be more receptive to my suggestions. Halfway through the movie, though, inspiration struck. She didn't need hints. She and Death simply needed to be in a situation that encouraged confessions. I fidgeted with my tail until the credits wrapped up, then raced out of the room. I needed to talk to Alfonsius right away. "Are you sure this is going to work?" I batted at Alfonsius's wing. "It will! Now shut up, I'm trying to listen." I pressed myself closer to the door of the former maternity ward. The old hospital had been abandoned years ago, and the town council had paid for all the right rituals to cleanse it of any lingering ghosts. Yet, in the last couple weeks, it had mysteriously developed a poltergeist problem. Bleeding walls, strange wails, that sort of thing. And who better to take care of such a thing than the local witch, with the capable assistance of Death themselves? Melissa might not be happy that I'd contracted a poltergeist to terrorize her town, but that was a problem for later. It was only a little bit of terror, and it was for a good cause. Are they in the room yet? Alfonsius was baiting nervously. Death's going to get suspicious, you know. Hush! I listened as a door in the distance slammed shut. All right, I think they're in. Give me the vial. This time, we'd come prepared for corks. I dug the tip of one claw into it, and Alfonsius held it steady as I slowly backed away, taking the cork with me. We both held our breath as the acid sizzled over the lock, fusing it shut. Perfect! I hissed. On to step 2. My plan, such as it was simple. Fear made people blurt out confessions, right? And there was nothing more romantic than comforting your loved one. So, lock them in a haunted hospital, give them a bit of a fright, and they'd be kissing before you knew it. There was just one problem, I realized an hour or so later. Death, being, well, Death, wasn't scared of poltergeists. I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was that Melissa would be equally sanguine. Now really, there's no need to make such a mess, she chided, half motherly and half exasperated. From my hiding spot among the ceiling tiles, I couldn't see her expression, but I'd heard that tone enough to imagine it. Patient, probably, with enough sternness to show she meant business. Not exactly the mood I'd hoped for. In response, the poltergeist sent another gout of blood down the wall. Melissa sighed. By my side, Alfonsius sighed as well. You said this would work. Hey, it's not my fault your poltergeist isn't scary enough. He sniffed. I think you're just bad at romance. Like you're any better, I grumbled. I'll have you know, Lady Cheyenne de la Rosa of the Aspen Hunters has agreed to co-parent a brood with me next mating season. Can you say as much, cat? I stuck my tongue out at him, but he was right. I didn't know what I was doing. I only knew that I wanted my witch to be with the person she loved. I shifted my weight from paw to paw, trying to ignore the dust tickling my nose. What was I missing? This always seemed so much simpler in the movies Melissa watched when she was feeling sad. A few shenanigans, maybe a misunderstanding or two, then boom, everyone lived happily ever after. Admittedly, they were always normal humans, but still, couldn't that work for a witch too? Down below, the poltergeist struck up a hideous wailing. Melissa clapped her hands over her ears and Death grimaced. All right, that's enough. They straightened, power gathering around them like a cloak. The scent of autumn leaves and winter snowfall filled the air as shadows coalesced into hooded robes. A scythe materialized in their now bony hand. All traces of their comfortable human persona fell to the wayside as they snapped their fingers, summoning blue fire. The wailing cut off instantly. Oh shit, I'm sorry. I didn't know they didn't say you'd. I'm sorry, Your Eminence. I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll be going now. The blood streaking the walls vanished, as did the ghostly forms that had been clawing at the door. A stick-thin figure shot for the ceiling, slipping between the tiles before either Death or Melissa could react. I bit back a yowl of surprise. Damn poltergeists and their icy auras freezing innocent kitty tails. Death melted back into the form of a mortal woman, robes giving way to a cardigan and comfortable slacks as flesh reformed around their bones. Well, that was exciting. Melissa huffed a laugh. Strange, I'd say, but exciting works too. She hesitated. Sorry for dragging you out here for nothing. Oh, it was no trouble. I'm always happy to help. Death, flushing, turned to the door, but the handle refused to budge. At least that part of the plan had worked, I supposed, but what good would it do now? If sticking them in a room together was enough to elicit a confession, they would have started going out ages ago. Melissa peered at the door, frowning. Aren't auto-locking doors a fire hazard? She sniffed. Wait, I know that smell. Alfonsius and I exchanged panic glances as she bent closer, running a finger over the half-melted edge of the lock. My heart sank as her lips pinched together. We were in so much trouble, weren't we? Sure enough, she raised her voice a second later. Terex! Terex, get out here! I didn't move. My paws felt glued to the tile. She propped her hands on her hips. I know you can hear me. Come on out. Well, shit. If I didn't come, she'd summon me, haul me back to her by an invisible leash. One of the downsides of the familiar bond, she could always find me. Normally, I was glad of it, for she'd rescued me from a few sticky situations that way. But now? My gut churned like I was about to cough up a hairball, and I wanted nothing more than to curl up with my tail over my eyes and pretend I was invisible. Since I couldn't actually turn invisible, though, I slunk over to the cracked tile in the corner of the room. I hesitated there, kneading the plaster, until Alfonsius clacked his beak at me. Just go, he snapped, and I went. Melissa spun as I dropped onto a metal filing cabinet conveniently placed below the hole. You were in the ceiling? She blurted out. I hunched my shoulders. I surely looked frightful, based on the amount of dust I could feel matting my fur, but I didn't have much hope for sympathy. Not with that expression on her face, that twist to her lips that said she was genuinely upset with me. I'd only ever seen that a couple of times, and it made me want to whimper now, bare my throat in submission. I just wanted to help, I whispered. She blinked. By stealing one of my acid potions and sealing the door? Kinda? It had all made sense in my head, but now, faced with her disappointment, I didn't know how to explain it. Alfonsius fluttered out from the hole, bringing a cascade of dust with him. Death sighed. I should have known. They held out an arm, and Alfonsius hopped ungracefully onto it. More dust sifted down from his feathers as he preened himself, not looking at any of us. Melissa looked at him, then back at me. What were you two thinking? You said you were going to search for more spirits, yet you decided to climb up into the ceiling? There might have been ghosts up there. You never know, Alfonsius muttered. Melissa ignored him. Seriously, Terex, what is this? I just want you to be happy. The words burst from my muzzle without my conscious volition, and I cringed. More quietly, I continued. The big gala's in a week, and you say every year you don't want to be alone on the solstice, and... Maybe, if it had been just me and her, I could have continued. But Death was there, head cocked to the side in a mirror of Alfonsius, and their eyes were bright with something I couldn't read. Not knowledge, but suspicion, maybe? Curiosity? Nervousness? They were a semi-immortal spirit, temporarily clothed in human flesh. It could have been any or none of the above. I folded my paws over my muzzle. What if Alfonsius had been right at the start, and our people were just friends? I was almost positive Melissa wanted more, but what if Death didn't? Alfonsius had gone along with my scheme, true, but elves weren't known for their emotional insight. I couldn't embarrass my witch by sharing her heart secret, not if Death didn't have the same one. Terex? Melissa's voice was quieter now. And? I shook my head and added my tail to my paws. Nope, not speaking, and you'll be grateful for that, I tried to convey with my eyes alone. Death stared at me, star-speckled eyes far too sharp, then looked at Melissa. Big gala? Melissa's cheeks went pink. The local coven always holds a summer solstice party. It's not that big of a deal, really. Except everyone takes partners to it, I told my fur. This would have been the perfect chance for her to ask Death out, but no. Unfortunately, Death had sharper ears than I'd realized. A soft "oh" escaped their lips before they turned back to Melissa. It's, a special time for you, I take it. Melissa turned even pinker. She hadn't heard my last comment as far as I could tell, which was all to the good, but she cast me a sharp look anyway. It's just a party, really. I mean, solstice is important on a magical level, but the gala, it's not... She floundered. Death bit their lip, looking equally awkward, but I thought, not horrified? Maybe even a little bit intrigued? A kernel of hope warmed my chest, but I kept my paws firmly over my muzzle. Don't make it worse, I told myself. Alfonsius had no such restraint, though. As the painful silence dragged on, he lifted his beak from his wing and said, in a bored tone, "You should kiss already." Death and Melissa turned identical shades of red. I glared at Alfonsius. "You are not helping!" "Am I not?" He flicked out a wing. "Look at them." I was looking, and that didn't look like two people about to kiss. It looked like two people about to burst into flames from mortification. "Alfonsius!" Death hissed. At the same time, Melissa exclaimed, "Is that what you're trying to do?" She pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm so sorry. I didn't put them up to this, I swear." Death opened their mouth, then closed it again as Alfonsius clacked his beak. Slowly, the color began to fade from their cheeks, replaced by something like mischief? "So," they drew the word out, "does that mean you're opposed to the idea?" Because I'm not," Death continued. "If, of course, you aren't." Melissa stopped stammering, but only because she looked like someone had hit her with a statue spell. "You," she managed at last, then stopped. With a thrust of their arm, Death launched Alfonsius off their wrist, then took a step towards Melissa. "Is Terex right?" they asked softly. Do you—" "Yes," Melissa said hastily, then laughed. If it was shaky, it was still real and glorious. "All right, familiars, we're not having this discussion with you here. Out." She gestured towards the door, then visibly realized it was still sealed shut. "Damn. Perhaps we should leave first, then continue this conversation later?" Death suggested. Melissa, her own blushes cooling, nodded. "I swear, I feel like a teenager again," she muttered. Then louder, "Yes, let's. And perhaps—" She took a deep breath. "Would you want to attend the gala with me?" Pleasure bloomed on Death's face. "I'd be delighted." "See," I told Alfonsius sometime later, "it worked." He glared at me over the sponge in his beak. We'd both been sentenced to chores, me refilling power orbs and him scrubbing endless piles of glassware. Personally, I thought he'd gotten the better part of the deal. My back was cramping from hours of motionless staring and channeling familiar energy, and I was bored out of my skull. But it was worth it. Alfonsius clearly didn't think so. "Next time," he grumbled, "try talking to them first." I bared my teeth at him. "There's not going to be a next time. They're very happy together, and they're going to stay that way." Sure, it had only been a couple weeks, but Melissa kept singing as she worked in the garden, and the joy she infused into her potions was enough to make my fur stand on end. She'd attended the gala with Death on her arm and hadn't returned till the sun was rising. I'd fill 1,000 power orbs if it meant she glowed like that every day. "No thanks to your scheme." He eyed the massive pile of dirty dishes gloomily. "My scheme worked perfectly, thank you very much." Or, well, it had worked in the end, and that was what counted, right? The owl ruffled his feathers, and I gave him my most innocent look. "Let me know if things don't work out with Lady What's-Her-Name. Maybe I can help you, too." In response, Alfonsius threw his sponge at me. And we're back. That was Match.Cat by Ember Randall. This is the first rom-com we've run on CatsCast, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. One thing I liked about this is that despite all the attempts at magical and non-magical manipulation, the one thing that worked was when the two familiars just told their people what was on their minds. Speaking of manipulation, I think the cat in this story could use a few more lessons in magical ethics. I give her points for understanding that love potions are bad, but I'd urge her to reconsider the ethical consequences of dosing an unknowing person with a truth potion and forcing her to divulge her innermost feelings. I know your intentions were good, Cat, but I'm glad that attempt failed. Today's cover art is based on a photo of Angel by Ricky Buchanan. Come chat with us. If you're a Patreon patron, you can join the Escaped Artists Discord server automatically through Patreon. Or you can find us on the social media service formerly known as Twitter as @CatsCastPod, or on Blue Sky as @catscast.bsky.social. We'll have a patron-only episode next month, but we'll be back on the public feed the month after that. In the meantime, you can find more narrative goodness on our weekly sister podcasts, Escape Pod for Science Fiction, Podcastle for Fantasy, Pseudopod for Horror, and Cast of Wonders for YA. Today's episode is brought to you by audio producers Wilson Fowlie and Dave Robison, associate editor Tara Nova, and me, editor Laura Pearlman. Our opening and closing music is Easy Lemon by Kevin MacLeod. CatsCast is a production of the Escape Artists Foundation, a U.S. 501c3 nonprofit. This episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License, which means you can't change it or sell it, but you can share it as much as you like. CatsCast relies on listener donations, so thank you so much if you've already donated. You can support us and all the other EA podcasts by donating via patreon.com/EA podcasts or through the website escapeartist.net. You can also help us out by leaving a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you normally leave those things. CatsCast is distributed monthly on the Escape Artists Premium Content feed. A separate public CatsCast feed gets a subset of those episodes. More details can be found in the show notes or at escapeartist.net/catscast. Thanks for listening, and until next time, we wish you all the purrs.